Welcome back to Fossil Rage Games. Today we are going to be doing a playthrough video for the Mountain. It is a melee character found in the game of Anvil, and originally when I wanted to start this run I thought, hey, you know, it'd be nice to show a melee character in this game. They play a lot differently than the gun-wielding characters. Definitely still a lot of fun, but definitely a lot different than what you're probably used to. So kind of when I started out this run, the whole intent was, hey, let's do a melee character, and then it pretty quickly morphed into something else in which I found a rocket launcher weapon and decided, you know what, I've never really done a rocket launcher playthrough before, so I'm going to go ahead and try that. So it was a blast. At this point, the game skipped a little bit, so I went ahead and just edited out that footage. And then we're going to continue on the run. As you can see, the melee characters, sometimes when you get them to attack, they will do a series of attacks, which is fine, and they hit really hard, but sometimes it's a little bit restrictive, because once they get into that sort of series of attacks, it's hard to get them to stop. So you'll kind of see that come out up here in a second. So there's a normal attack. The melee characters tend to have quite a bit of life and hit points, and they seem to be pretty resilient. Although a lot of their weapons are melee weapons, they do have some range-style weapons. So you'll see coming up, they can use things like flamethrowers. They have the ability to use things like Gatling guns. And they also have the ability to use a rocket launcher, which is a pretty cool option. Rocket launchers are very slow to fire, but they hit really, really hard, and they have sort of an AoE effect, so it hits an entire area after the warhead detonates, which is pretty cool, especially when you're fighting massed units. One of the fun aspects about the melee characters, they can break open barrels in just one hit. A lot of the gun characters, sometimes it takes many, many hits, and some of the weapons are pretty ineffective against barrels, honestly. So it's nice to be able to slash through those barrels and get that money. So at this point, I find a rocket launcher, so it's pretty early on into the run, and it's not something I've really played around with all that much. Just with it only having a single shot, it just seems a little bit restrictive. And as you can see, there's a fairly big delay when you fire it, but when you hit something with it, it hits hard and it splatters and splashes and does damage to everything in the area, so that is fantastic. Here is the end of the stage, and at this point, something that's very cool with the rocket launcher, especially when you're playing the Mountain, is that you can use your ability to get everything kind of stunned and it sucks everything into the middle, and then you can shoot them with a rocket launcher. So I found that to be a pretty effective and fun strategy, and it's super, super powerful. The other thing that you're going to do is, you know, especially on this run, I was looking for weapon power. I just wanted to go all out and just get really, really crazy damage. So some of the stuff that I'm buying, you're going to see that. You're going to see this rocket launcher is pretty ineffective against the barrels. You just can't really do much to them, and it's kind of restrictive. I don't think it's that great of a weapon to use against the barrels. Next up is the next planet, so we're going to be fighting a mini-boss right out of the gate. And one of the things that you want to look for is probably weapons first and foremost when you go into these shops. And then, you know, kind of look around for some of these other types of abilities and power-ups. And just remember this, too. At the end of the round, once you have more money, you can come back to the power-up stations and that shop, and you can go shopping after the boss is defeated. You have that 1-minute timer that counts down, so that's pretty fantastic. Alright, we're on to the first boss. Since this is on the easy mode, it's only going to have 2 bars of health. One thing you're going to notice with a rocket launcher is that a noticeable amount of life is taken from the boss every time you hit it. So that's pretty good, and it's noticeable. Something else that, at this point, when I saw the damage output, I was kind of interested to see what would happen if you started critting quite a bit. So as you watch, oftentimes this weapon will crit, and you can see it because the damage bounces in yellow. That means that it's a crit. So something that I was interested in this run is, hey, let's increase my chance for crit and maybe some of my crit damage as well, and the power of the weapon. So if you put all these things together and you mix them all together, you get just this ridiculous damage output. So you'll see a little bit later on in this run kind of what I mean, as just the amount of crit damage that I'm doing with this combo is just absolutely ridiculous. It's very slow, but it hits really, really hard, so it's a lot of fun. That boss was fairly easy, especially when you're playing with another player. The other thing that you want to look for is obviously some hit point regeneration and some armor over the course of your run. You want to make sure that you have enough defense to finish and that you're not getting wiped out, especially if you're playing with other people. You know, you don't want them to be necessarily carrying you through the match or through the round. That power up I just got is going to punch through enemy armor, which is kind of along that same sort of damage output theme. On to the next planet. So it's interesting in this clip, you can see that the rocket launcher is not actually hitting some of the enemies. It's like they're too small, they're too short, so the rockets actually just fly over the top of them. That was something interesting that I didn't really notice before when I was playing with other people when they were using the rocket launcher. So that's kind of strange, that's a little bit restrictive, so be on the lookout for that. A lot of the enemies can be one-shotted with the rocket launcher, which I found to be pretty crazy. If you just saw that last hit, it took out 4 enemies in one shot. That's pretty powerful, especially when you get into some of the higher levels and where the enemies are super massed up in force. It just does a ridiculous amount of damage. So some of the things that you can notice is the damage output. On the side of the screen, the DPS trackers like 10,000. That's pretty good for, you know, kind of not the best weapon. It's just I think it was a purple weapon that I got originally. That's pretty wild damage output for something kind of like a basic weapon, honestly. I think what I like about the rocket launcher is how surprising it is and how fast it bursts through enemies. It takes very little effort to shoot these things, and then another thing that's interesting about it is that you can fire at something at point-blank range and you don't hurt yourself with the explosion or the blast, which I thought was pretty cool. A lot of games, you know, they punish you if you accidentally grenade yourself or accidentally hit yourself with a rocket. In this game, it's perfectly fine to put the barrel of the weapon into your enemy and just fire on them. It is pretty effective, and you don't miss very often. The other thing, too, is if enemies are massing around you and that blast goes off, it's going to hit everything around you. So it's a great way to clear out enemies that are massed right on top of you. In this power-up station, I was super happy to find an attack speed upgrade, which is absolutely fantastic for the rocket launcher. It's a little bit sluggish when you fire it, but it really makes a big difference when you start getting power-ups to increase the attack speed on this thing. And that kind of fits into the same category of increasing your damage output. So you can increase the damage of the weapon, you can increase how fast you fire it, you can increase how much armor it punches through on an enemy. There's a whole bunch of different things that you can do to increase your damage output. And if you stack all these on top of one another, it gets really ridiculous. And this character, through this playthrough, just started getting more and more powerful, more and more ridiculous with the damage output. And it got to a point where, honestly, you're one-shotting a lot of even bigger enemies, which I thought was pretty fantastic and pretty amazing. So in this clip, we have like a small little mini-boss sort of thing. And honestly, it goes down pretty fast. Here's an example of one of the better power-ups in the game. It's going to inflict plus 30% damage on the boss, and since in this game you're going to be spending a pretty decent amount of time fighting bosses, do not pass up those upgrades. The first level is 15%, the second level is 30%, and then it goes up and up and up. And, you know, I think the higher level one actually increases your crit chance as well, which is pretty fantastic. We're moving on to the next place. Anything of value? Doesn't look like it. I don't know, the defense suit's not bad. Then up for our normal upgrade for this level. Here's that kind of silly mission that you go on where nothing really happens. You just blow up eggs. It just gives you a bunch of points, a bunch of credits that you can buy upgrades with. Which is kind of fantastic. Not very hard, obviously. And there's, I think, 3 of the upgrade modules on this map as well. So once again, the rocket launcher, pretty cool. It doesn't really do much against these larger hives on this map. Does pretty good splash damage on those little ones, though, which is pretty good. I went ahead and just edited out the end of that egg mission. It gets a little boring. The 20% run speed mod is super cool, and I actually recommend it on any character. Melee characters, it just seems like it does a little bit better because you're always just right on top of the monster. So that one I highly recommend. You know, it's definitely pretty cool. Good way to stay out of the mix and get away from the boss if it's getting too aggressive. These 2 crit upgrades I think are pretty crazy as well. So I got them both, and it gives you a plus 80% to crit damage. That's a great option, especially if you're going just for raw, sheer overall damage, which is kind of the point of this build. And you'll see that it kind of paid off over the course of this mission. Made the missions pretty easy, made the bosses definitely manageable. As always, though, once you have 3 different places to shop, check them all out and walk in between them. Give yourself some time. Don't feel like you have to immediately just grab the first upgrades that you see, especially if you've got, you know, 3 different shops to go through.
Starting planet exploration.
On to the final battle. Go ahead and go through the shops one last time and get your last skill upgrade for the boss. You know, spend a little bit of time looking at stuff, especially that recovery support upgrade. It's only 60 if you've been banged up in a previous mission. Feel free to just max out your hit points before you go into those boss fights. They can be pretty tough, pretty demanding, and oftentimes when you pop in and you don't have full hit points, you can get wiped out and one-shotted real quick. I always start the timer on the boss just because the other players sometimes take a while and they dally a little bit. So go ahead and just get that timer going, and it kind of forces them into the boss fight. This is the Mountain Kraken. It's a fairly challenging boss, especially on the final round when you get to the last health bar on it. As you can see, the rocket launcher is doing a pretty decent job at chipping away at it. Every time that rocket launcher hits, you can see, you know, a decent amount of damage drop off that boss creature in the middle. I'm gonna go have to kill the robotic death hunters real quick. Rocket launcher does pretty good against them. Something else that you're seeing is that the enemies are debuffed, so when I hit them with that special ability, it's basically increasing the damage output on them. And you can see some of the crits that are being landed on the boss. They're actually pretty decent. I think one of them was 80,000 just a couple seconds ago. That's a pretty serious amount of damage. The other thing, too, about melee characters, especially when you're fighting some of the bigger bosses, it can be very challenging when you're standing literally right on top of them the entire time. So as you get toward the end of some of these missions, it's not a bad idea to swap out your hand-to-hand weapons for something that's a little bit ranged. So I think the rocket launcher is a great choice for that as well. So you're not necessarily having to stand right on top of the monster. You give yourself a little bit of range. The further back you are, you're going to have a little bit better reaction time. You're going to be able to block and shield yourself a little bit better, and maybe avoid some of those attacks. There was a hit that was just at 96,000. That's pretty amazing. As you can see, those yellow crits, especially when it hits the boss, they can be pretty sizable. $165,000 hit right there. That was pretty cool. Another 96,000 hit. Yeah, you can chip away at the boss pretty quick with the rocket launcher. $68,000 crit. That was pretty good. I mean, essentially, if you build your character, it kind of almost plays itself, especially toward the end of the game. There's a 97,000 crit. Pretty amazing. And honestly, the better you build your character, the less skill you have to have, which I think is a kind of cool concept. And there it is. That's the end of that boss. Pretty cool. The rocket launcher is a pretty cool weapon. I recommend it. If you haven't tried it out in Anvil, go ahead and try it. It's surprisingly fun. Definitely really good splash damage. It has a decent amount of range on it. You can chip away at bosses. Pretty good. I want to thank everybody for watching this video today, and as always, have fun gaming.